Hey friends, and welcome to eHuddle. My name is Tyler Long and I serve as the Personal Ministries Director for the Washington Conference. I'm going to be sharing with you today some ideas on really how to help your church understand their need for church revitalization. You know, one of my favorite quotes is from John Maxwell. And John Maxwell said, and I quote, "Everything rises and falls on leadership." Everything rises and falls on leadership. Now, when it comes to the leaders in the local church, we think of the pastor. Now, this is going to seem kind of bold, but when you think about the pastors, I want you to qualify the pastors. Similar to what we do during like an evangelistic meeting, you got your A, B, C, D interests. But one of the things we've discovered in helping churches go through revitalization is everything rises and falls on the leader. You have to have an A level or at least a B level pastor. Because if you have a B-level pastor, if they're coached, they can become an A-level pastor, but truth be told, a C or a D rarely ever rises to that of a B or an A-level pastor. Now, why do we say everything rises and falls on leadership? Because, well, the truth is, the first job of a leader is to define reality. Not only does everything rise and fall on leadership, and not only does the leader need to define reality, but the leader also needs to own their reality. They need to own where they're at. So in church revitalization, how do we define reality? Now, I really appreciate what the NAD and what e-Adventists have done with the different church vitality. You need to know, is my church a multiplying, growing, plateaued, or declining church? One of the ways we define reality in church revitalization is by looking at the metrics of tracking baptisms and attendance. Not only do we need to track these, but I believe at every church board meeting on the agenda, the church should be looking at, where are we so far this year when it comes to our attendance? What do we need to do to become, or at least maintain, a growing church attendance of 2%? Or what about baptisms, professions of faith? Now, I realize we're only in February, but at every board meeting, the church needs to be tracking these. And so what happens, when you log into e-Adventist and you realize my church is in decline, or maybe plateaued and decline? Well, here's what you do. You need to change your systems. You need to change your systems. You see, the results you're getting in your church are because the systems that you have in place are designed to give you those results. So for example, if you had 0 baptisms last year, your system is perfectly designed to give you 0 baptisms. And so something has to change. Now, if you're taking notes, I'm going to make this really simple, and I'm going to take you through some very simple baby steps that we walk a church through so they understand their need for revitalization. So step number 1, if you're taking notes, step 1 is you have to listen to the pastor. Now, as the revitalization coach for the Washington Conference, I like to meet with the pastor first, and I usually take him out to eat or we go for a prayer walk, but I want to find out. I want to get to know the pastor. I want to know about their call to ministry. And so I take time listening to the pastor. Step 2 is I define reality with the pastor. Believe it or not, some churches and some pastors have never logged into e-Adventist, or it's been a long time. And so we log into the church's e-Adventist account and we define reality. And I share with the pastor, or I should say e-Adventist shares with the pastor, if their church is in decline, plateau, growing, or if it's multiplying. Again, it's important for churches to know their numbers. At every board meeting, you've got to know your numbers because you can't improve what you don't measure. So you've got to know, where are we with our attendance? Where are we at when it comes to baptisms? Now, step 3, what we do in the Washington Conference is we go over a contract. So my conference president, Elder Doug Being, helped craft an incredible contract that the conference signs, the pastor signs, and the church board signs, assuming all are in agreement. That way we all know what our part to play in the church revitalization process is. And so I like to go over the contract with the pastor before I meet with the church board. I never meet with the church board to discuss revitalization unless I have first met with the pastor. I don't want there to be any surprises in that meeting, because one of the things I've learned is revitalization moves at the speed of trust. Now, step number 4 is we meet with the church board. Now, church revitalization sounds really cool until you do it. And so we meet with the church board and we go over the contract, but then I also want to find out about the church. And so as I meet with the church board, I usually ask for about an hour of time, maybe an hour and a half. And so make sure it's not like an already filled, church board meeting, that there's time for me to meet, because I don't want to keep board members out till 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And so when I meet with the church board, I begin to ask them about their church, and I want to know the history of their church. In fact, there's a series of questions I typically ask the church board. So for example, the first question I ask is something like, share 2 or 3 things that you really like about your church. Now, this is one of the most, simplified questions to ask, but it's really about tapping into some of the good memories that the church has. Another question I ask is, if there was one thing that you could change, what would that look like? In other words, sometimes I'll say, if you were a genie, or if I was a genie and I could just snap my finger like that and give you any wish you wanted in your church, give you the perfect church, what would you wish for? And most answers are typically things like, we wish we had better music, or usually more kids, or more young families, or all kinds of answers are similar depending on, as I go around to different churches. And I don't take sides. I never take sides. I'm simply just on my computer, typing in, hearing the answers from the church board. Another question I'll ask the church board is, what are you currently doing that's not working? Again, I'm trying to find out the history of the church board. Another question I'll ask, and this is an important question, because when I ask this question, I'm looking at body language and I'm really trying to pay attention to the tone of the answers that I get. And the question is this: what's one reason why anybody in your church would be hesitant to bring a guest to church? And I ask this question really because I want to see how the church responds. If a church responds like, they're upset that I would ask that question, how dare you ask us? If they're, irritated or defensive, it tells me that this church may not be ready to go through revitalization. So I want to find out how open they are. And finally, I'll ask the question, what does a healthy church look like to you? In other words, what do you really want? And usually when I ask that, what does a healthy church look like? What do you really want? Usually the answers I get are things like better music, more young families, more kids, more lively service, more people, more baptisms. But I don't just ask one really. I say, but what do you really, really want? I'll get some more answers, but then I say, and usually they get kind of annoyed, but I'll say, but what do you really, really, really want? And this usually gets down into the heart. And I recently had a church board member, his eyes began to tear up, and he said, Pastor Tyler, I was baptized in this church, and I was married in this church. He said, when I was a teenager, I actually helped build this church. Literally, my blood, sweat, and tears are in the sheetrock and the 2x4s. He said, you want to know what I really want? He said, I want to leave my church better off to the next generation, assuming Jesus tarries. I want to leave my church better off. And I knew at that moment that this board member really understood the question. You see, when we're talking church revitalization, we're not talking microwave. We're talking about a crock pot. So I'll journey about 2 years with the church, but the overall revitalization, we're talking 3 to 5 years. It's a journey. One of the quotes I often will share with the church board is one from Henry Ford. And Henry Ford said, and I quote, "If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten." In other words, if you're happy with your results, if you like being declining, well, keep doing what you're doing because you're probably going to get the same results. So the first way we define reality is we look at e-Adventists. The second way, and this is step number 5, if you're taking notes, is the church will take the NCD survey. Now, I know many churches will say, hey, we took the NCD survey 10, 15 years ago, and that might be so. But taking the NCD survey is one thing, but did you work on your lowest factor, right? And did you take the survey again 18 months or 24 months later to see if you've actually improved your lowest factor? So how do we define reality? We look at e-Adventist, we take the NCD survey, and we also send a secret visitor or a secret shopper to that church. And that secret shopper looks at the website, they look at how they were greeted, they look at the bathrooms, the Sabbath school, the church service, the music, the preaching, if there's a fellowship lunch, and there's like a 5 or 6 page report that the church will do, that the secret shopper will do on that church. And that report is then shared with the church board. And then finally, we begin the journey. We start meeting with the board, we meet with the pastor, and we start this coaching journey. This year in the Washington Conference, one of the things we're going to be starting is similar to what Natty does. They have the Acts Church Revitalization Boot Camp. Well, we're trying to start a church, they have the church, Acts Church Planting Boot Camp is what I meant to say, but we're wanting to start the church Revitalization type boot camp that meets quarterly to help our churches, help our pastors be coached to help turn their churches around. Now, the question I always get asked is, well, what's the secret ingredient? What's the one thing I have to do? Well, there's not just one thing. There's actually about 6 things, believe it or not. You see, there's about a half dozen things that make about 80% of the difference. And as church leaders, you want to pour all your energy into these 6 things. Because remember, success is not doing extraordinary things. Rather, it's doing ordinary things extraordinarily well. So what are these 6 things? Well, here's the winning formula if you're taking notes. You've got to have prayer. Revitalization never happens without prayer. You've got to have the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit brings the increase. The church needs to have faith-based optimism. That's the belief that the best days are still out in front. There's got to be intentionality. There's got to be accountability. And there's got to be reality. And if you're a leader in your local church, use that winning formula, but you've got to start off by defining reality. And how do we do that? We look at e-Adventist, we do the NCD, we send out secret shoppers, and 18 months into the revitalization journey, here's how we know if the church is heading in the right direction. That church becomes a growing church based upon attendance and baptisms. They take the NCD survey again and they've improved not just their lowest factor, but their overall average. We notice there's a cultural change taking place in the church, and visitors, guests, begin to show up at that church. This is how we know that things are moving in the right direction. Hey, God bless you guys at eHuddle. I am sorry I couldn't be there in person, but may the Lord bless you and your church as you start the revitalization journey.